I'm Tiffany Guarnaccia, the CEO and founder of Kite PR. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary by talking about modern mentorship with some of the best in the business. I have Tameka here with me. Tameka, jump in, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about what you're up to today.
Sure. So my name's Tameka Kee. I am here in New York. I'm actually based on the West Coast, but I'm here in New York doing a bunch of interviews and panels and hosting things because that is what I do. But my day job is the Deputy Managing Director of CIMM, which is the Coalition for Innovative Media Measurement. That is a mouthful. At CIMM, what we do is focus on how to measure media and make it more effective for advertisers, for media sellers, and for the tech companies that kind of sit in between. I joined CIMM earlier this year as the organization expanded its purview to CIMM was previously focused primarily on TV broadcasting companies, but as programmatic and ad tech are eating everything video related, they wanted to bring in someone who was an ad tech expert to kind of help with that transition. And so that is what I'm doing, sort of educating buyers and sellers of TV, and primarily sort of the research teams at a lot of these organizations on how ad tech is kind of basically eating the world.
That's a good point. There's been so much disruption in the industry, and you've really been at the forefront of that. I'd say you're someone who almost embodies the mantra of challenging the status quo. Tell me a little bit more about how you've done that and where you got to where you are today.
Yeah, interesting. That was one of the questions that I highlighted, because I'm really excited that we are in a space now where entrepreneurship is encouraged and embraced, and people going out and sort of carving out their own path, not necessarily as a company, but as an individual entrepreneur is encouraged. That was not encouraged sort of 10, 12, or even 15 years ago. And I think one of the biggest ways I was disruptive in the industry was going and choosing to work for myself. And I didn't necessarily know what I was doing at first, but I knew that I was working for an events company at the time. And I knew that, that there was an opportunity to create events for other companies as well as content for other companies, without kind of a parent company over me. And I was kind of just able to do it. And I think that at the time, I remember my parents being like, wait, you don't have a job and you're just gonna leave this job. But thankfully for 10 plus years, I was able to continue to have new clients and new companies and new projects to work on. And so I think that I disrupted kind of the idea of what a journalist was supposed to do at the time, which was go from one publication to another publication, because journalists always jumped around, as everyone said, but go from one publication to another publication to another one. And instead I said, you know what? I think there's other ways to tell stories. That includes being on stage. That includes telling stories with vendors, perhaps, because that was also a no-no. And yeah, so I think I was disruptive by going out on my own and choosing to tell the stories of tech companies as opposed to media buyers or publishers, because the tech companies were starting to change things.
That's such a great point. There's been so much change over the last decade. I'd love for you just to elaborate on your perspective a little bit more as to what you've seen in the business environment over the last 10 years that, to your point, maybe paves the way for more opportunities for folks that are looking to be more entrepreneurial, whether it's an entrepreneur in a company or even starting their own business. There's probably an opportunity to think a little bit differently today.
Yes, definitely. So I would say a couple of things. I think there's been a democratization of tools, of a variety of kinds of tools, whether it's, so let's say being an entrepreneur, there are so many tools that you can use to invoice and bill your clients, for example, things like Expensify, things like FreshBooks, things like QuickBooks, obviously, which is a little bit more expensive, but there's been a democratization of tools that allow you to start, run, and sort of continue to have your business flourish and thrive that I think have exploded over the past 10 years or so. I mean, I remember when I first was working for myself, like there actually was no invoicing tool. Like I would make paper invoices for my clients. And now we're at a place where you can go to something as big as QuickBooks, which is expensive and has, tons of features, or you can literally invoice people in something really simple. And so I think that's one area of kind of transformation and change from an entrepreneur perspective. From an intrapreneur within a company perspective, I think maybe one of the biggest shifts has been the shift to working from home, right? The shift to remote work. There's also something that was disruptive at the time when over the course of my career. I remember I had one client who wanted me to come in-house, and I, and sort of go from being a contractor to a W-2 employee. And we were kind of ironing out the compensation and the contract. And I was like, well, I need to work from home for 2 days a week. And they were like, it was like, it blew their mind. And this was what, 2016. So not even that long ago. And they just could not fathom why I wanted to work from home. One, two, how it would actually work, as a team. And I pushed for it, and thankfully it sort of worked out. But I think that while the pandemic was, challenging and bad on a number of levels, I do think one of the lasting effects is that companies understand that employees, you don't have to be in the office. It is good to be in the office at times. There's definitely collaboration and camaraderie that is necessary. I think that I can feel isolated sometimes when I don't get to spend time with my team, but for intrapreneurs, for people who want to sort of be innovative within their organization, I think the ability and flexibility to work from home and make your own hours and kind of work from any workspace has been a massive, massive shift. So I would say democratization of tools, the shift to working from home. And then I would also say, kind of this idea of, I don't know that it's a specific disruptive technology trend, but I think this idea of kind of mental health in the workplace and sort of showing up as fully yourself as you can has been a huge shift. I don't think that you should, I think there's some parts of yourself that you don't need to bring to work, and rightfully so. I think that there's been a massive shift in terms of sort of accepting people sort of for their whole self and showing up in ways that may not have been traditionally accepted in the corporate world. And that allows other people to shine and kind of and have their talents and capabilities and things that they can contribute come to the surface.
That's such a great point. There's so many opportunities just to embrace the change. I thought, especially over the past few years, the only constant is change. Oftentimes we're trying to kind of set, what are we doing next? And what's my next goal? And there's a big part of that you should push yourself and set goals because you're more likely to achieve them. But you also have to kind of embrace that change and iterate from that perspective. And I think that's something that can help you advance in your career. And when you think about your career path, and you've gone from being a journalist to an entrepreneur to taking on a role within a business. If someone's looking to do the same and think differently about their career path, what advice would you give them?
Oh man, I would say be prepared for some ups and downs, right? I mean, especially going to be an entrepreneur. I chat with friends now in the role with CIMM. It is a sort of W-2 actual employee role. And I'm like, wow, it's nice to have health insurance and it's nice to have the potential for a 401k. So I would definitely say, you have to be prepared for some ups and downs. You have to be prepared for, moments where the path is not clear. Right. And who your next client is going to be may not be clear. Whether you are going to enjoy working with your boss may not be clear. Whether you're going to thrive in the new company, in the new job that you take is going to be clear. But I think, I guess I would say a couple of things. One is, it sounds kitschy, but you have to follow your heart. You have to, and I don't mean, in kind of an altruistic Pollyanna way. I mean, when you are quiet with yourself and you think about whether you should make XYZ decision, what kind of gets your heart pumping? What kind of gets your blood flowing? What raises or elevates your pulse? That is a message from your body and from yourself to maybe either go in that direction or not go in that direction. But I think it's a matter of kind of tuning into sort of what's your North Star and what are you trying to accomplish? And your North Star may change, but I guess I would say throughout my career, I've always wanted to work with companies that were doing interesting things. I've always wanted to work in places where I was able to learn about technology that I didn't know or understand before. I've always wanted to work in places that had diverse teams and women leaders. I've always wanted to work in places that that were cool and I got to do cool things. And so those were my kind of North Stars that I went towards. And so it was like, if an opportunity came with a client, for example, and it was a ton of money, which thankfully happens, right? It was a ton of money, but it didn't kind of feel right, or it was something that I'd done over and over and over again. I kind of tune into myself and listen to my heart and see what that says. And it was like, no, actually go towards what moves you. So that's one thing I would say. And then I think the second thing I would say is you don't have to have all the answers, and you have to be comfortable with a little bit of ambiguity. And then the third thing I would say is make sure that you build a community around you of people who have your back and people you can, people who will advocate for you in rooms perhaps where you're not in, and will kind of pat you on your back and kind of pick you up when you're down.
That's such good advice to think about the community and how you can lean into that. I do believe that your network is your net worth, and you should think about how you constantly build that and keep that engaged. But I love your perspective on think about what moves you and use that to develop your North Star and stay true to your North Star, right? That's something that's important to you, right? When you're thinking about the decisions you make in your career, but be prepared for the ups and downs. And that's something that, especially as an entrepreneur or even myself, there's lots of ups and downs in business that you see. I remember in growing the business, we won a big client, we lost a big client, and just, being prepared for that. And if you can't be prepared, you're just ready to embrace that change overall. So there's the ups and downs personally and within your business. And then there's the ups and downs that we can't predict within the industry or the economy. So there's a lot of things to consider, but there's so much opportunity. So when you think about even the industry overall, you have such a good perspective on that. What do you think is the biggest disruptor for the industry as you look forward? And how could that actually be an opportunity for young professionals?
I think the biggest disruptor of our industry is the consumer. Right? It's the consumer and how they behave and how their behavior is changing things dramatically. I attended a conference earlier this week, and one of the presentations was about TikTok. It was by TikTok. And they were talking about how the shift from how the difference between influencers and creators, and how they were talking about how it's more beneficial for brands to be affiliated with creators now than it is for influencers. And then they gave these sort of best practices for how brands could engage with creators in an authentic way and and give them freedom and also seem like they were supporting them consistently. And it occurred to me in that moment that, what was it, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, where we were having conversations about how brands should engage with influencers and how it should be authentic and how they should support the influencer so that it doesn't just feel like a campaign. And so within 5-6 years, 10, maybe even less, how quickly the shift has gone from the way people look and the Kardashians and sort of this very glossy, overproduced kind of influencer focus to something that's a little bit more authentic, something that's a little bit more real and maybe uncomfortable and maybe a little messy in the creator space. But that's been driven by consumers. That's been driven by people choosing whether they want to pay attention to super glossy Instagram influencers, which I still do, but I guess that's my age, versus sort of creators that feel more authentic. And so you have this billion-dollar shift that is going to happen now. And it's driven what? By people, driven by an app that nobody knew existed 10 years ago. And so I think the biggest disruptor of our industry is the consumer. When you think of advertising and marketing, what are we trying to do? We're trying to, well, unless it's B2B, but that's separate. We are trying to, our industry is trying to get consumers to do something, whether it's buy something, whether it's eat something, whether it's vote, right? With, activism. And so I think that paying attention to what consumers are doing and how is probably one of the best ways to be able to keep track of what's coming down the pike and maybe future-proof yourself and your business.
That is a brilliant take. Oftentimes when we're talking to other professionals, they're trying to gauge what should I do next in my career? What's the next best decision? And we tend to look maybe too much navel gazing, really a little bit too much of the industry jargon. And I love your perspective is to just take a big step back, think about that zoom thinking, zoom out and look at consumer behavior trends, look at people and how we're starting to really make decisions based on their behavior. So just love that perspective. When you think about a lot of the decisions you've made through the course of your career, clearly you've been able to keep your finger on the pulse of so many different things as you've looked at consumer behaviors and what's happening in the industry. Have you relied on mentors to guide some of your career decisions as well?
Oh my God, yes. Oh my God, yes. This question I was so excited to answer because I've been lucky enough to have quite a few mentors, both sort of formal and informal. But I mean, from even before my career, like I remember when my first job, I was like 15. My boss at the time, her name was Jean Segarra-Rosa, and I will never forget. Like she just I learned how to fax file, you be in an office from her, and it was amazing. And we've kept in touch for years. She got me a book by Bell Hooks, and sort of one of the first books that is called Bone Black by Bell Hooks, and it's one of the first books that made me realize that this thing that I did insularly, which was writing in my journal, could actually turn into a career, right? This thing that I thought was just me in my head could actually be something that was much bigger. I mean, I'd read other people's work, Maya Angelou and Laura Ingalls Wilder and stuff, but Bell Hooks kind of made me realize that, the way that I string words together can actually be something that other people would want to see. And so that was a crucial point in my career. I've also, my first editor at Media Post, Lori Peterson, actually had a bunch of amazing editors. Tanya Irwin at Media Post, they kind of whipped me in line because I was definitely a little bit wild on the reporter end, but they were amazing. And then when I remember when I first worked for myself, there were two women that I had turned to. One was Amy Jansen, she had a PR firm, and another was Jonalyn Morris, who had a PR firm. And I remember just asking them, I'm going to work for myself. How do I, you've been doing this for a really long time. How do you do this? And kind of they both took me under their wing and just helped. And whether it was, Amy actually took me under her wing as a subcontractor, and sort of we were working together on projects. And Jonalyn kind of just, would take coffees with me when I would ask her questions. I actually asked her about billing clients, and she sent me a LegalZoom contract once and was like, here, just use this first and go from there. But and I have had male mentors, but I've been really, really lucky and grateful to have women in my career that I could turn to, with specific questions about, hey, how do I build this client? XYZ is happening. How do I figure this out? But then also some of the more esoteric questions around, how do I follow my heart, right? How do I decide between whether to go to this client or not? How do I decide whether to kind of go big in terms of an event or not? And so I've been really lucky to have lots of mentors in my career.
That's fantastic. And I think one of the key things that I'm hearing from you is that you were never afraid to ask questions. I feel oftentimes, we might have this fear of asking questions because we might not show up in a way that seems like we don't know everything, because oftentimes, especially as women, right, we want to be in control, we want to know everything, but that's not possible, especially as you're learning. So just embracing that mindset and being more curious along the way is so helpful. That's something that I did as well, is just kind of reaching out to others who were running businesses, who were in business, and just ask, like, how did you put together this initial document? Or how did you use a framework for developing your executive team? Because so many people are just willing to give you that advice, right? When you start to ask those questions and ask for that time, if you're creating
Oh my God, I remember asking you a question. I remember when you were working on communications week, I remember being like, wait, how did you, like, really, how did you do this? Are you actually sort of creating, how did you pull all of those organizations together while running an agency at the same time,
Thank you. I know that was a lot of those shared experiences we had. And a part of it is getting advice, looking at mentors, looking ahead in the industry. And then I think there's also just a healthy dose of maybe wearing like rose tinted glasses when you're a founder.
Yes. Yes, you have to. It's always going to work out.
The belief that it's going to work out. You have to believe in yourself and just keep carrying that through. And you still have to believe in yourself even through the ups and the downs, right? Like that. I know my North Star is valid. It's aspirational, but I can do it. And you have to be your number one cheerleader in so many of those situations. So
yes, you do. But I would also add, it's not always easy either, right? Like there's days where it's like, yes, I'm my number one cheerleader. Yes, this is great, but this actually sucks and it's uncomfortable and I don't like this and I'm unconfident and I feel scared. And I think that's also when you have to have that community around you, whether it's your spouse, your partner, your friends, your mom, and or your mentors, to kind of go. And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, no, actually it sucks. And this is bad, but you will pick up and move on, right? It's kind of the both. It's all of those.
Yes, Tameka, that's such a great point. When you're leaning on your community and your mentors, it's not just about the good things, right? You're not going to them and saying like, oh, I just won $1 million piece of business and what do I do? That's generally not when you're reaching to mentors, right? It's in these big moments. It's like, I have this valley and what do I do? Or, I remember when I was going into ready to become a mom and thinking about having a baby and getting pregnant. And it felt like such a big decision because it is in everyone's life. You're changing your identity. And I had a lot of trepidation about the perception of the business. And I realized in some ways those fears were a little unfounded. But in some ways, there was some grain of truth in that. I remember being in a meeting and being like visibly pregnant and getting some feedback that we didn't get the business because I was pregnant, that the person was concerned that I wouldn't be able to carry the business after, and would I come back? And lo and behold, of course I did, to grow the agency and then work with their competitor. So
Good.
These things come back around, but to your point, it's getting advice on all those different pieces and knowing your North Star, but embracing the ups and downs. So it's all about that journey that you're on for your career. So when you think about your career, if you could like wind the clock back and take it back to the start of your career, what advice or what kind of key things do you think about now, or your mantras now that you have that would have helped yourself when you were first starting out?
Oh gosh. I would say trust yourself. I would say trust your instincts in terms of kind of the consumer behavior and the trends that were going to occur when and how. I would say surround yourself with people who are your champions, but not necessarily blind followers, if that makes sense. I mean, I don't have any blind followers, but I do think that having some people who can kind of who could have given me a different perspective on things might have been helpful at different times too. But then I also would say, don't listen to the people who say you can't do it that way, or that's not how it's been done, because that's always been, I think that traditions and sort of standards and rules exist for a reason. We do need to have them, but sometimes they can lock you in a cage, and also you need to know who they serve and who they were kind of developed for. And so I guess I would say, take advice, take all the advice, but you don't have to act on all of it. And then maybe the last thing I would say early on to myself is, I think it echoes something that you said. Be the kind, genuine, nice person that you are. Don't let yourself be taken advantage of, but don't feel like you have to be a hard ass just because it seems to warrant it. I think that so many of a part of why I've been able to have a long-standing entrepreneurial career, a client service facing career, if you will, is because I was a nice and genuine, kind person, and people enjoyed working with me, and people enjoyed funneling me business. And so, yeah, I think that's what I would also say is, don't be afraid to be your kind, nice self. If you actually are a kind, nice person, it's okay to be that, because your relationships will bear fruit, and kind of, at the end of the day, that obviously we want money, but at the end of the day, your relationships are what you have as well.
That's fantastic. Just being true to yourself. We've done so much in your career, and will continue to be a mover and shaker. I'll be watching this space. Anything else to share?
I guess I would just say, mentorship doesn't always have to look like a specific program. It doesn't have to be super time intensive or labor intensive. It can be as simple as, seeing that young person on your team, or older person, or returning mom, or whomever, right? Seeing that person on your team and recognizing that they may be struggling, recognizing that there's a light in them, recognizing that there's something that that they need, and having a coffee with them, or reviewing their deck, or editing something for them, or before a Zoom call being like, hey, you have something on your teeth, right? Like there's mentorship shows up in so many ways. It doesn't have to be a formal program. It doesn't have to be time and labor intensive. It just has to be you giving back to someone that you connect with and that you see kind of promise and potential in. And so you should always do it.
That's a great point, Tameka. Sometimes the simplest question, like, how can I help, can be the most impactful. Well, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate the time. Really appreciate great conversation today.
Thank you so much. This was delightful.